Hi, this is Heather Jerome from heatherjerome.com and from the sonatasandpartitas.com. This video is a part 2 video about articulation in early music. Now, if you haven't seen the part 1 video yet, please do have a look at it because this video picks up directly where part 1 left off. Now, at the end of part 1, I played a tiny little snippet of the Adagio from the G minor sonata. Now, looking at that score, basically we see probably a lot of things, but there are two things. We can see the notes and we can see the slurs. Now, those slurs are also called the bowings, which means they tell the violinist when to change bow direction. So basically, if there's no slur, you go down, up, and then if there's a slur, you just keep going down until the slur is finished, and then you change bow direction again. So in a sense, those markings are just very practical, like right-hand fingerings in a way. But they're also called the articulation marks. And if you think of articulation as being speech, you can think of those bowing markings as like Bach's direction on how we can make his music speak. Now, those bowings, there's a lot in them. You could just say, well, it's just where you go down and where you go up. But the fact is that for many different reasons that I want to explore in this video, they're like a little code, a little language. Now, for example, if you see a passage that has several two-note slurs in a row, that tells us that within those slurs, the first note is strong, the second note is weak. It could also tell us that the first note is long, the second note is short. And that articulation, it made its way into vocal music. Now, the fact is that these paired two-note slurs may have actually originated back in ancient dance music, where, as described in part 1, the bow was not used to hit the string, but to actually drag across them. I mean, going down, up, it's such a natural gesture. Fiddlers still do it now. Guitarists, we're not trained to think of music as gestures, but in violin music, for example, the third song in Suzuki Book 1, it has the kids going down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, down, up. And so you have those two downstrokes in a row. Well, the arm has to come around and play another down bow. And here we have these 3 to 5-year-old kids making their first gesture. In guitar, we're trained to keep our right hand contained. Now, the slurs, the bowings, the articulation marks. It's obvious to see the care that Bach took in writing them. And so here, we can think that Bach has given us some clues as to how to interpret his music more gesturally and how to make his music speak. Now, we're guitarists, not violinists, okay? But if we can understand just a little bit about violin technique, and especially how modern and Baroque playing differed from each other, we can use that information to help us in our interpretation of those markings. So I've asked my daughter Julia to come and give us a little demo. Let's start by having a look at the violin technique that we're already familiar with and that we take for granted. The violin is held on a shoulder and it's held in place with the chin so that the left hand is free to move and shift. The bow is pretty evenly weighted throughout. The tip balances well with the frog, which is the end that the hand is holding, and the bow moves across the strings on the horizontal plane. And a lot of the sound is actually just a direct result of gravity, with the bow hairs coming into the contact with the strings by gravity. Now the Baroque bow, in contrast, notice the difference between the two tips, the tip of the Baroque bow and the tip of the modern bow. The Baroque bow has a lighter tip and the bow is shorter. Now while the violin itself basically looks the same, the violin is held on the collarbone, facing forward, and it is held in the left hand. That means that shifting doesn't come as easily. Holding the violin on the collarbone this way, facing forwards, means that a down bow really does go down, and an up bow goes up on the vertical plane, not the horizontal plane. Also, since the bow is not held against the strings by gravity, you get a lighter sound, a lighter touch, and the sound at the tip naturally differs from the sound at the frog. Now, as I'm sure you can imagine, all this directly affects the articulation, as we'll see when Bach notates the slurs. So if we're to put this all together, just think of it. In the Baroque time, you didn't have the weight of the arm plus gravity keeping the bow hairs uniformly connected to the strings throughout the stroke. But what you do have is the weight of the arm moving vertically so that the down bow, up bow movement naturally had a bounce to it. If you're to read accounts by romantic conductors, early romantic conductors, they're frustrated trying to get the old players to have a more legato sound, to get it so that their down bows and their up bows sound the same, and so that you can't hear the change in bow direction. Well, that's what homophonic music means. But in the Baroque, that movement down, up is called détaché bowing. And the amount of detach was constantly being varied. And that way you could hear the counterpoint in the lines. Now, let's have a look at a few passages of music and just see how we as guitarists might interpret the slurs. So the first one I chose was actually one of the very first pieces that I recorded when I was working at interpreting the slurs. It's the jig from the third cello suite. As you can see, you don't have to be ultra scientific about this. I'm a big fan of just jumping in and figuring out as you go along. When I recorded this piece, what I tried to do was do something with the slurs that would sound natural. Okay, so another piece that is actually really poetic with the slurs is the Adagio from the G minor sonata. Notice how you can be free with the timing inside those long slurs. This next one is the Presto from the G minor sonata, and it's really interesting because in this piece we can see how Bach uses the slurs to really solidify the structure of the piece. First of all, when we arrive at the sort of high point of the first section in B flat, this big happy place, we land there with the sort of bubbly 3-note slurs. And then after the key of B flat is firmly established, and as soon as we start to leave to head to A, he destabilizes the key by having the slurs go over the bar lines. And then when we're sort of like really heading towards the key of D minor, there's this like really nice sense of forward motion with the 2-note slurs. This is a Karente from the B minor partita with its iconic 3-note slurs. If you want a basic rule of thumb for slurs, you can say that the first note is accented and the last note is shorter. And this is especially true for the 3-note slurs. Now, one great thing about this piece is how we can see over the long range how the slurs just hold the thing together. And also notice that first we have an intro, and then when that's over and we're just heading towards our first cadence, the 3-note slurs break off and we get into this like hemiola section that's all sort of divided into two and things go across the bar line. And that is really made to like stand out in contrast to the slurs that are there in the intro and throughout the whole movement. This next piece is all in pair slurs, which, as we've seen, work really well in the violin. This is the double from the Allemande from the B minor partita. What I tried to do on the guitar to get this strong, weak articulation was I tried to do it all with P and M. And honestly, on good days, it sounded great, but I could never get it consistent. So eventually, I just changed my right hand fingering and, just tried to do it with finger control to get that same type of articulation. This last piece, in contrast, has no slurs. Now, the last piece that I've played was the double to the Allemande, and this piece is the next one in the suite, is the double to the Karente. So, again, when there are no slurs, it doesn't mean just do what you want. It actually means play detached. And so, in a sense, Bach here is juxtaposing these two different articulations, the paired slurs, which is a very strong gesture, and the detached playing, which is another very strong gesture, but very different. So I hope you found this helpful. There will be another articulation video, part 3. I love this topic. If you want to find out when new videos are uploaded, just subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications. And as always, we love to get your feedback. Let us know what you think at sonatasandpartitas.com.